I'm Jon Acuff, and this is the What the Speak podcast.
What the Speak, episode 20. Another keynote speaker that doesn't know what I need help with.
Do you kick ass when you speak, present, or pitch? If not, these expert discussions and insider tips can help you right now, today. Welcome to the What the Speak podcast. I'm your host, Brian Kelly.
Struggling with feeling comfortable in front of an audience when you present? Or maybe you're confident, but you have difficulty stumbling over filler words like and ah. Well, you can start kicking ass today by signing up for our weekly VIP updates. As a bonus, you'll also receive 11 free tips that will uncover 6 psychological secrets to public speaking, plus 5 tips on how to stop using filler words. Go to whatthespeak.com/VIP. Jon Acuff, are you ready to answer the question, what the speak?
I am.
All right, cool. So, Jon, you are an influential blogger. You're a best-selling author of 4 books, including your most recent success titled Start. Plus, you're a professional speaker who's spoken to hundreds of thousands of people. But let's hear it directly from you. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, my background is marketing. I've spent about 15 years working with ad agencies, working with clients, and branding and kind of storytelling around my background. And started a blog a few years ago that went viral and got to discover this whole social media world. And so since then, that's been a big focus, and had a great chance to work with a guy named Dave Ramsey for 3 years, and now doing stuff on my own. And public speaking is a big part of that. And so that's kind of a snippet. And I live in Nashville with my wife and 2 kids.
Excellent. So let's talk about specifically what is the topic or the topics that you usually talk about when you go out to an audience.
Well, it really depends on the audience. I mean, a church audience, it's obviously there's a church kind of gospel element. Business audience, it can be anything from how do you work with this next generation of employee that's not motivated by money the same way the previous generation was, or it can be to an organization. I spoke to a chimney sweep organization, and it was how do you grow your business using social media, and so. Or it can be to an individual audience of, hey, you've been stuck. 70% of Americans hate their job or feel disengaged. So how do you not fall into that? What are some things in your own life that you can personally do?
So I'm curious, it sounds like you've got a lot of different aspects to the same general topic. Do you have these canned, presentations, or are there things that for each audience that you're tailoring specifically to what it is that they want you to talk about and really where they're at and the things they're struggling with?
I'd say it's a mix. So I'll go talk to a college football team in the next couple of days and about dealing with negative people. And so I'll probably create something pretty original for those guys.
Yeah.
There will be times, though, that, it's like if U2 showed up and didn't sing One, you would think that wasn't fun. So there are times where I know that I've done these 3 ideas before, and this particular client loves those ideas, and we talked about them before, and I'll try to customize them so that they apply to their business or where they are uniquely. But I think it's a balance. I used to think as a speaker you had to write a new message every time, and that's just not true.
Yeah. Do you find that there's like certain key threads that you continually weave in, but then you tailor towards what that audience is looking for?
Sure. I mean, I really believe that we as humans have struggled with the same 5 or 6 things since the dawn of time, joy and loneliness and feeling, are we worth enough? And so I tend to have one about bravery. I tend to have one about criticism. I tend to have one about hope. And so some things that regardless of your business or where you are in life, you go, yeah, I get that. Like I resonate with that.
Yeah. Kind of that common ground.
Sure.
Paul B. Evans talked to me about that not too long ago, which is a pretty cool approach to finding, what we all have in common that we can have as a shared experience.
Oh, great.
So let's dive in now to your origin story as a speaker. I'd love to hear exactly how did you get into professional speaking? Was it something that went back to college or before college? Was it something that happened in the last 5 years or so. Let's get into exactly how you got into this.
Yeah, I'd say it really ramped up in the last 5 to 6 years. My dad's a pastor, so I grew up with the expectation that it's not weird to do that in front of people, and I really feel like that helped me a lot. And seeing how he did what he did, also. Was I taking notes in high school of public speakers? No, of course not. But what literally happened was that I had this blog and a conference said, hey, come speak. And the weird thing about being a public speaker is that one day you're not, and then somebody goes, we'll pay you to speak. Do you do that? And you go, I totally do that. And so this conference asked me to speak, and I was horrible. And then Dave Ramsey's team asked me to speak, and I was slightly less horrible, but not dramatically better. And then over the last 3 years, I've just found it's about doing reps. I've probably done, 200 or 300 gigs to 250,000 people, and it's just about doing it over and over again. And so my story was like a lot of people's. It was one day you don't do it, and then you go, let me try that, and you enjoy it, and you're not good at it, but that's okay. You shouldn't be good at something you just started anyway. And so I started to speak at a rehab center a couple times to get practice. A friend of mine spoke at old age homes because they will never turn anyone down, and they're so honored that you're there, and so there's all these ways to kind of practice. But yeah, it's really only been the last 5 years that I've focused on it with some intensity.
Got it. And so you went from essentially being a blogger, somebody that's writing online, to somebody that is now in front of audiences, large audiences. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's been a fun transition. It's been fun to see the similarities and the differences.
Cool. Okay, so the other aspect is, what's one specific area that you've struggled with that's been difficult for you, especially maybe in those early days when you first got invited to speak at that one conference? Is there something that stands out in your mind, or maybe even something that's still to this day that you struggle with?
Yeah, I would say that what the challenge for me, which is a challenge for a lot of speakers, is the ending. A lot of speakers write an amazing beginning, and then they let the ending organically kind of wrap up wherever, and they ramble to a conclusion. And that's why a lot of pastors will close with a prayer. They didn't do the hard work of actually ending the sermon. And so out of nowhere, they go, bow your head, close your eyes, and they pray, and they put a bow on their sermon with a prayer. And so for me, yeah, I would say that that's one of those things that I think I can get a lot better on. I think I'm good at opening. I feel like my pace is getting better. My pauses are getting better. But the ending is still one that I think I've got some work to do.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because a lot of us really think about, maybe the introduction, setting it up nicely, and then obviously the bulk of what the content is that we're delivering. But to just kind of let it go at, hey, let's do some Q&A, or like you said, let's end with a prayer. But to really think about, how can you knock it out of the park, drive it home in a way that people are going to be impacted to the point where when they leave that room, that they've either been inspired, or you gave them some type of call to action, that they're going to go out and take that message that you just shared and do something with it.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, it definitely is. And we do get, but ending anything is hard. That's why Saturday Night Live, a lot of their skits don't end well, because it's an amazing joke at the beginning, and then it just kind of, again, rambles until the end. So I think it's a good challenge. But yeah, I know that of the things that, there's a lot of things for me to work on, but that's one that comes to mind.
Cool. All right. So the next segment that I want to focus in on as part of our discussion is your expert perspective. So you've got some unique things that I would love to explore with you. The first being is that I'd heard that you'd always wanted to be a writer, and eventually a speaker. So if that's true, is that true?
I don't know that I always said speaker, but I definitely always said writer.
Writer, okay. But it kind of naturally progressed. Most writers do become speakers. So, it sounds like you've put in a lot of hard work to get to that point. Can you discuss, some of those challenges, some of those things that you did to get to the point where you are now? Because it just didn't happen overnight.
Sure. Well, I've definitely put in 10,000 hours toward writing. The Ericsson, the Swedish scientist that found that 10,000 hours to expertise that Malcolm Gladwell wrote about. But I haven't done that for speaking yet. So, part of the hard thing is you just have to say yes to as many gigs as you can in certain seasons. So recently I spoke at a local college, and there were 15 people there. And it was, I've done 13,000 people events. So 15 is a lot smaller. And so you have to really not get that ego of like, look who I am. Like, you go serve those 15 people. And maybe there's one person there that needs to hear what you're going to say. So I think that's where, I think when people think their career and their arc will go this way and they don't think they ever go back down to serve smaller audiences, there's a great danger there. And you don't know where one gig might turn into a next gig. And so I'm trying to be really deliberate with that. And 15-person gigs are harder than 5,000 because you can see individuals who aren't connecting with the message.
Right.
Like when you've got 5,000, it's just kind of this blur. It can be. And so that's the stuff I really like to do. And that's the stuff that I feel like helps keep speakers sharp.
It's pretty cool to hear you say that, because I think a lot of people who have aspirations of, becoming a great speaker, they think, wow, there's something to aspire to. And once I achieve that, I'm going to have a certain, status level or whatever. But what you're saying is that it's about the message. It doesn't matter if it's 3, 4, 5,000 people, or if it is, a dozen people in a room. The reason why you seem like you have this motivation, and a lot of speakers that I talk with, is because of the message, the passion for what it is that they're sharing. And I think that's important for a lot of us to think about.
Yeah, I don't think you need the numbers to justify it. Numbers are great. I'm not trying to be falsely humble and go, I don't even notice how many people are there. Like, I want as many people there as possible. But You're right, it's because I believe in the message. And so I just think it's really small thinking to think that 15 isn't enough or 100 isn't enough. Like, if it's the right 100, that's amazing,
Yep. Cool. Well, the other thing is, I've noticed that in the past, you've been a guy who gets up on stage and you're very casual, you're very comfortable, and you've been seen with your hands in your pockets.
Mm-hmm.
And more recently, I've seen where you stop doing that. Is that something that's been conscious or that you've worked on? And would love to kind of get your perspective on that.
Yeah, well, I worked with a speech coach, which is, that's a difficult process because you have to watch yourself on video. But I think that's part of getting better. And so, like, I know that one of my tells is when I'm nervous, I'll, like, touch my nose, like stuff like that. And then from the on stage, it felt natural to go, like, put my hand in my pockets. But from stage, it looked like I couldn't get them in. Like, it was just awkward. And so, yeah, I think you go through these phases where you go, you know what? Like, even the speech coach said I was leaning forward too much. And she said, you need to stand back and invite people into you, not overwhelm them with your physical presence.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's all those little nuances that I think you get better through time. But yeah, like, if you watch videos, I've done this before. It's like me going, like, constantly touching my nose. And that's annoying for the audience. And I didn't know I did it until my wife pointed it out. A couple other people pointed it out. And I think there'll always be some degree of tell that you have because it's just human. But for me, yeah, putting my hands in my pocket, I try to stay away from that. And also stay away from, like, putting them in if I have a sweater on that has pockets.
Yeah.
Like, and again, like, constant. That nose, I always go back to it. So, and it's just a silly thing, but, like, people notice it.
Absolutely. Well, the thing too is I've talked with different presentation coaches and talked about this. Like, a lot of people, it's kind of like, don't ever put your hands in your pockets for X, Y, and Z reason. And then others are like, well, if it is something that's natural and something that's not superly distracting, but it allows you to have that kind of almost like down home, comfortable, accessible kind of personality to it, that it's not a bad thing. So
I think it depends on the individual. I mean, if you wouldn't do it in a normal conversation, don't do it on stage.
Right.
Like, if it's an affectation, the crowd's gonna know it's fake, and they're gonna feel like, oh, he did this because he wants to seem natural. But nobody, like, I don't, in normal conversation, unless I'm nervous, touch my nose. And so I don't need to do that on stage. So yeah, I think it's weird when there's rules like, oh, always do this, always do that. So I think there's principles, but you still have to apply them to your own unique style and your own, like, for some people, they do amazing visual presentations. I don't do a ton of them because it's just not how I am as a speaker. I grew up watching comedians as the standard for speaking.
Yeah.
And no comedian is, like, showing slides, unless you're a prop comic. And so I've just never really been that way. I will say that when I use a slide to reinforce a key point, I think the key point gets listened to in a different way. And so I'm not saying never use slides. I just say you got to figure out where your unique skills and personality matches with principles.
I agree. Okay, the last question I have for you before we move to our final segment is you've got a background in copywriting, and this show is all about speaking, presenting, and pitching. And so I'd love to get your quick take on tips for pitching concepts or ideas.
Who are you pitching them to?
Let's say it's a customer, prospective customer.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is you have to speak their language. I think before you pitch it, you have to know what they're really looking for. And so the public speaking example I'd give is that I do a half-hour call with every client before I get there, because it gives me a chance to understand what are their real needs, what are their, what's going on in their company, what's going on in their church. So I think a big part of pitching is going back a step and going and asking questions and learning, because when I do a speech and I use some of the words that organization is all about, completely changes the conversation. I get to pitch in a different way. Yeah. But I think sometimes we sit in our cubicles or our houses or our home offices and we try to brainstorm what the person needs without just going, hey, what do you need?
Yeah, doing the research and really trying to zero in on exactly what it is that you have that might help them.
Totally.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so we're going to end up with our rapid fire Q&A portion. Right. These are a half dozen questions that we're just going to quickly run through. The first thing that comes to your mind, let's hear what you got. So the first one in this segment is, do you prefer slides or no slides? And we just talked about this a little bit.
No slides.
No slides.
Wait. No. I prefer great slides. The question should be, do you prefer amazing slides or no slides? Because I don't prefer slides just as a medium unless they're amazing.
Yep.
The challenge as a speaker is I don't have the budget. It's hard to get a designer to do it the way you want to do it sometimes with the amount of, because you just don't have a budget. Yeah. So it's not that I dislike no slides. I just think a great slide can really help.
So do you design your own, or are you working with?
No, I'd hire somebody.
Okay. Cool. All right. So who's a speaker that inspires you the most and why?
I really like Sir Ken Robinson from the TED Talk that was famous.
Yep.
I like Elizabeth Gilbert because I think she's really honest. I like Gary Vee. I really feel like Gary Vee is in your face, and I feel like that's who he is. I'm inspired by speakers who are the same person on stage as they are off stage. I think one of the best speeches I ever saw was Malcolm Gladwell, where he mixed in the financial crisis with a battle in the Civil War, and it was so perfectly threaded. And so those are the kind of people that inspire me.
Sweet. What's the funniest thing that's ever happened to you when you've been giving a presentation or a speech?
Funniest thing? I mean, nobody's gotten... Well, it was funny because she ended up being all right, but somebody had a heart attack right after I spoke. And they ended up being fine. I wouldn't say it was funny unless I knew they were fine, but that was an intense, front row, crazy situation.
Yeah.
That, again, it ended up being A-okay, but in the moment, you're terrified. You're what do you do?
Yeah.
And so that was, that turned out to be funny, but it was certainly terrifying.
Wow. Yeah, I think maybe I need to revise that question to not just the funniest thing, maybe the most unusual or
unusual. Because again, you never want to be I'm the guy that likes when people have heart attacks.
Yeah.
Not at all. But as far as most unusual, that was definitely the one.
Well, and what a curveball, huh?
Yeah, it was very bizarre. So ambulance had to come, stretcher, whole deal. And again, it ended up being fine, but it was one of those moments where as a speaker, you don't know what to do.
Yeah. Did you end up having to just kind of put everything on pause until that was resolved?
Well, I was doing another speech right after in the same room. So the whole thing, it just derailed everything.
Wow.
As it should have. And then I guess the other thing, I've had events where there's 300 seats and only 10 people come. So that's not, it's funny later. It's not funny in the moment. In the moment, you're oh my gosh. So.
Cool. All right. So how big of an impact has speaking had on your career?
I'd say a big impact. It's probably 50% of my salary. So that's certainly a financial impact.
Yep.
And it gives me a chance to connect with people. The problem is when you're online, people don't know you, and a sarcastic comment might come across as mean. And so public speaking gives me a chance to go, I'm a guy like you. I'm just your job is accounting. My job is to write books. There's still a huge value in 3D and real life situations. The internet's amazing. This is fun that we get to do a Skype video, but there's still a power in going somewhere face to face. Like the reason I sell a lot of stuff in Dallas is I went to Dallas 14 times this year.
Wow.
Like that matters,
Yeah. You got a strong connection with the folks in Dallas, I guess, right?
Apparently.
So what's one piece of advice that you wish you had received 5-6 years ago when you first got invited to that conference? Something that you know now.
Well, there's a great book. I think it's called Stand Like Lincoln, Speak Like Churchill. And in that book, it says, never open by saying, I'm so honored to be here today. Like, never open that false, empty thank you. Open with a powerful opening line. So I wish I would have known long ago to not open. Like, most speakers reintroduce themselves. They go, hey, I'm John. And like the intro just said, you're John. And so I would say that advice, because it's so simple, but it's really important.
Great. Well, Jon, it's been great to have you on the show. We'll have all the links to your website, your social media profiles, and any other resources in the show notes over at whattospeak.com.
Great.
I want to sincerely thank you for your time, for sharing your expertise and some of the stories about your journey as a speaker, and certainly as somebody who kicks ass when they speak, present, or pitch.
Well, thanks, man. I've had a fun time doing the interview.
Cool. If you liked what today's guest had to share in our discussion, you may want to grab an audio copy of their latest book for free by going to WTSaudiobook.com. That's WTSaudiobook.com.
All right, here we go with the outro.
Thanks so much for joining us today on What to Speak. Be sure to visit whattospeak.com for show notes on every episode and to sign up for our email list to stay updated on resources that'll help you kick ass when you speak, present, or pitch.